Hello, today I'm going to talk about Woburn Abbey in Bedfordshire, which is the home of the Russell family, who since the 1600s have been the Dukes of Bedford. Today the house is home to the 15th Duke and his family. The Russells were wine merchants in medieval times, but it was during the Tudor period that they really rose to prominence, and they acquired land at the time of the dissolution of the monasteries. So Woburn Abbey was originally a Cistercian abbey. The family owned estates on top of the Woburn estate, including Covent Garden in central London. They don't actually own Covent Garden any longer. They sold it in 1913, but it was the family who developed it originally. They still own 30 acres of Bloomsbury. Bloomsbury I talk about as being the brainy part of London because it's where the British Museum is, and the headquarters of the University of London and various medical foundations are based there. And you only need to visit Bloomsbury and see some of the street names such as Great Russell Street, Russell Square, Bedford Square, Tavistock Square, to be reminded of the connection with the family. It was the grandfather of the current Duke who first opened Woburn Abbey to the public in the 1950s, and he was one of the very first stately homeowners to do that, and he faced the scorn and derision of his aristocratic friends, but he responded to them by saying that in fact he'd rather be looked down on than to be overlooked. So you approach the house via a drive through the majestic parkland, which is populated by 3 different species of deer, and the first sight that you get of the house is of the magnificent Palladian west facade, which dates from the 1700s. You enter the house via the north wing. It's in the south wing that the fabulous state apartments are. And the house appears to be very large, but it's actually much smaller than it originally was. In the First World War, in common with very many stately homes, the house was made into a military hospital. And in the Second World War, women who worked at nearby Bletchley Park, which was the code-breaking centre, lived at Woburn. And at the end of the war, the house was in a dreadful state of repair. There was a real issue with dry rot. And so the Duke at the time had no alternative but to demolish the entire east wing. I love a good family tree, and the Russell family have got a fantastic one, which you can see at the base of the great staircase. You see on the tree the strategic marriages that various members of the family have made over the generations. So Woburn is connected by marriage to Blenheim Palace and Chatsworth. There have been 3 pairs of brothers who have inherited the dukedom, which I think is unique. There have been many distinguished members of the family over the centuries. Queen Victoria had as one of her prime ministers Lord John Russell. He was actually PM at the time of the Great Reform Act of 1832. The 11th Duke successfully saved from extinction a breed of deer from China. They were called the Pair David deer, and he brought some of them over to Woburn, successfully bred them, and in 2003 the family were able to reintroduce them to their native China. I love the 7th Duchess. She was a lady-in-waiting to Queen Victoria, and it was she who first introduced the idea of afternoon tea. Obviously the Duchess found the gap between lunch and dinner just a little bit too long, so at 4 o'clock in the afternoon she used to have a cup of tea accompanied by a piece of cake, and that's what set off the custom in this country of taking afternoon tea. The family has a blot on its reputation from the 17th century, the 1600s. In 1683, William Lord Russell was found guilty of being involved in an unsuccessful plot to assassinate King Charles II. It was called the Rye House Plot. William Lord Russell was executed for his part in it. 10 years later, he was given a posthumous pardon, and his father was given the dukedom to make up for the error. The 4th Duke was an absolute tip-top grand tourist, and the collection at Woburn is as rich as it is, largely because of his efforts, his energy. he acquired 24 Canaletto paintings, which he commissioned directly from the artist in Venice. Only Her Majesty the Queen has more Canalettos than the Bedford family have. 21 of these 24 are on display in the dining room at Woburn Abbey. You also see at Woburn the most fabulous collection of Van Dyck paintings. Some very significant Van Dyck paintings are at the house. A whole room of paintings, portraits by Joshua Reynolds. There are exquisite works by Claude Lorraine, Jan Steen, Albert Cuyp. There's a room that is decorated in hand-painted 18th century Chinese wallpaper, which is exquisite. You'll see a grotto, a room that was created in the 1600s, which is entirely inlaid with shells. Fabulous porcelain collection, and probably my favourite piece of porcelain is an oval dish sitting on a plate. The dish has got a serpentine fluted edge. It's called a saucrenelle, and it would have been used as a wine glass cooler. So the bowl would have been filled with ice. The wine glasses would have been placed upside down in the ice to cool them before drinking wine from them. Probably one of the most famous paintings at the Abbey is one of the 3 versions of the Armada portrait of Queen Elizabeth I. There are sketches by Queen Victoria. She was very much a friend of the house. As I've mentioned, the 7th Duchess was a lady-in-waiting to her. So fabulous collection in the house. The gardens are also beautiful. So the house is surrounded by 32 acres of garden. And I suppose the most dominant feature of the gardens at Woburn are the cedar trees. There are 2 types of cedar trees, the cedars of Lebanon, which have got horizontal branches, and the deodar cedars, whose branches droop. Some of these trees are 250 years old. They're quite remarkable, as are the monkey puzzle trees. So lovely, lovely gardens. So what would I take from Woburn if I could just have one thing? Well, actually, it's connected to the gardens. It's Humphrey Repton's 1804 Red Book. The 6th Duke in 1804 commissioned Humphrey Repton, who was the first person to call himself a landscape architect, to completely redo the gardens at Woburn. Repton was a successor to Lancelot Capability Brown, who 50 years previously had completely redesigned the houses of many of the stately homes. Repton worked in a very different way from Brown, and he had a very different style. His projects were much more modest than Brown's, although he did work at really big hitting houses like Longleat, Stoneleigh Abbey, and of course Woburn was a massive commission for him. He reintroduced a much more formal type of garden. So he incorporated in his designs terraced gardens. He used lots of trellis work. He would have themed gardens. So you'd find in his projects, you might find a Chinese themed garden or an arboretum. And he reintroduced the idea of flower gardens surrounding the house. The way he worked was that for every project, he would create this beautiful red leather-bound book. He called them his red books. And with his meticulous handwriting, he would write out all the explanations for all of his plans, his ideas, or his hints, as he called them, for the project in question. And he would incorporate in the books maps and plans, and he would sketch designs of what he had in mind. And he would use little flaps, so they'd be like lift the flap pictures that he produced and incorporated in these books, so you could see the before and after effect. They're absolutely beautiful, these books, and the 1804 Red Book for Woburn exists within the archive at the house. Recently, the 15th Duchess has dusted off this volume and has been using it to recreate the gardens as they were originally designed in the early 1800s by Humphrey Repton. So I absolutely love this book. I would love to sit under one of the trees in the garden at Woburn and look at every single page in it. I also love it because it's in the archive at Woburn. These stately homes have always had the storage capacity, and usually the owners have had the inclination over the years to retain enormous quantities of written material. So we have personal diaries, private letters, guest lists, menu plans, picture hangs, building plans, invoices, receipts, which together make this enormously useful resource, which informs our knowledge of how these houses used to function, how they were created, how they worked on a day-to-day basis, and how the families lived in them. And I love that the current Duchess is using the archive to enhance and make even more special our experience of visiting Woburn. Thank you very much for listening.